I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it here. You wouldn't like it, nobody likes it, nobody likes it here.
The most daring idea ever attempted in motion picture entertainment. The last three people alone in the world.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Fleeger and I teach film at Ursinus College. Thank you for joining me for the second episode of Films That Matter to Me. The film today is chosen by my colleague in Media and Communication Studies, Lynne Edwards. And today's film is an amazing picture called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, starring Harry Belafonte, Swedish actress Inger Stevens, and Mel Ferrar. The film is from 1959 and was independently produced for MGM. It's a film that blends social realism with science fiction, and it's a movie about the end of the world. The film is based on a 1901 novel called Purple Cloud by M.P. Shiel, a British author, but the novel doesn't contain the racial element of the movie. That was added later in a story called The End of the World by Ferdinand Reyer. The film is incredibly provocative for the contemporary moment. It features empty streets of the kind we saw only a few weeks ago during the COVID crisis, because atomic poison has seemingly vaporized all of humanity while Harry Belafonte was in a mine working. And when he comes out, he finds himself to be, at least for the first 30 minutes of the movie, the last man on Earth. Until, of course, he finds Inger Stevens, a white woman who has also been managed to survive the nuclear holocaust. Together, they meet Mel Ferrar later on, and the movie changes from being a story of provocative interracial tension to being a story about the ownership of a woman. In this case, who is going to possess Inger Stevens? And the ending of the film is a highly provocative draw on the Western genre. At the time the film was made, Harry Belafonte was at the height of his career. He had released his album with the single Matilda in 1953, the same year of his first film role. In 1954, he made Carmen Jones for Otto Preminger, and he had been starring in films and producing albums. Calypso in 1956 sold more copies than Elvis that year. So he was an incredibly famous star to be in this film. And of course, he sings a couple of numbers in the picture, and Dr. Edwards and I will talk about what those mean as the story here progresses. So here's Dr. Edwards with her introduction to the film.
Hi, my name is Lynne Edwards, and I'm a professor of Media and Communication Studies at Ursinus College. I'm here to introduce the film, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. I first encountered this film about 5 or 6 years ago when I was looking for what I hoped to be the first Black science fiction film. I teach a course in science fiction and fantasy film, and I wanted my students to be able to track the evolution of representations of race and gender over the past several decades in science fiction. The minute I saw this movie, I knew it would be perfect for my class, in part because I really hated it. It evoked so many powerful emotions in me that I knew my students would have to grapple with these issues head on. And having me for a professor meant that they could do it honestly, openly, and without fear. Visually, this film is beautiful to watch. It's filmed in black and white, with long overhead shots, panoramic views of an empty and abandoned New York City, contrasted with noir-esque shadows of Harry Belafonte as he contemplates a world that is no longer what he's accustomed to. And honestly, visually, Harry Belafonte is also beautiful to look at. When he smiles at Sarah in the film, you just want to smile back. When he shows childlike joy at succeeding in getting the lights working again and dances with his shadow like a little kid, you can't help but smile and feel his joy. You also can't help but feel his pain as he struggles to break free of what can only be called mind-forged manacles, an inability to let go of the segregationist past that he was raised in, even while the lovely Sarah Crandall clearly demonstrates that despite being a white socialite, she is interested in him romantically, that she loves him, but he still cannot see himself as her equal.
Unfortunately, neither did some of the film's producers. Director Ranald McDougall had a lot of experience as a screenwriter. He had adapted Mildred Pierce for the screen in 1945 and had written a number of other screenplays and directed films as well. He proposed 3 distinct endings for the movie to the producers of the film, the results of which would be determined not for the story's sake, but by audience reaction. Because, of course, American audiences, white American audiences, in 1959 were particularly bigoted, and in the South there was even a threatened riot of the screening of this film in Fayetteville, Georgia, because of the potential that Ralph Burton and Sarah Crandall might actually get together. So the 3 endings that were proposed had to do with who got the girl. And the one that the studio went with was perhaps, as you'll see if you watch the film, the least stressful for audiences, and it appealed to no one in the end. And of course, if no one were to get the girl at the end of this movie, McDougall proposed, it would be necessary for Ralph Burton to voluntarily give her up to the white man, which shows you really just the rootedness of racism in Hollywood storytelling in the 1950s. This wasn't Hollywood's first attempt to deal with stories about white bigotry. In 1950, Joseph Mankiewicz directed No Way Out, a story about a doctor played by Sidney Poitier who had to treat 2 white racist characters, the results of which produced an uproar in the town. And of course, 1959 was also the year of Imitation of Life, Douglas Sirk's amazing movie about passing, which is an extremely complicated look at black and white America at that time. I definitely recommend, if you have time to see it in combination with this movie, it would be quite enlightening. At the same time as all this was happening, Harry Belafonte had also played a similar kind of character to what we see here in a movie, Island in the Sun, in 1957, in which he was playing opposite Joan Fontaine. And a number of scenes from that movie were either cut or the film itself was refused to be shown in the South because of a potential romance between the two. In spite of all of that, though, there's a scene in this film, The World of Flesh and the Devil, which absolutely asserts Ralph Burton's right to live. It's near the beginning of the film when he reaches New York and he's running through the streets shouting his name.
It's me, Ralph Burton. I'm alive. I'm Ralph Burton and I'm alive.
We could productively compare this to Will Smith in I Am Legend, who drives his red car through the streets amongst many, many deer attempting to hunt. The anguish on Smith's face is similar, and the red car is like the pronouncement of his name, moving itself through the streets, asserting its right to be there. Indeed, this scene with Ralph Burton is a powerful expression that Black Lives Matter.
Science fiction for me is an escape. Issues of racial discrimination, gender discrimination are usually situated on monster or alien bodies set in a world far, far away in a time far, far away. But this movie is just too real. And it makes it difficult to really sympathize with Ralph at first, because all I want to do is smack him and say, dude, you're an engineer that got the lights back on in an abandoned Manhattan. How can you not stand tall and firm in your equality, your powerfulness? And yet, upon meeting Sarah Crandall, he immediately moves himself back into the position of being a second-class citizen, despite her willingness to see him as her equal. Or does she?
There are several elements of the film's style that seem to make an effort to counter Sarah's less than ideal feelings about equality. And there are other moments that produce a subtle acquiescence, unconsciously or consciously perhaps on the part of the director, to this philosophy. I think it's kind of useful to put these elements in 2 pairs. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the statues in the movie. There's this moment in the film that draws on Sergei Eisenstein's movie Battleship Potemkin, where he uses these statues of lions awakening to suggest the idea that Russians might rise up in revolution. He made that movie in the 1920s. It was an absolutely political propaganda film. And here McDougall uses the lions as well, a nod to that earlier film, hopefully, I think in this moment, to suggest that something ought to change, that maybe we can look to society beyond this end of the world moment and imagine how we as a world could reshape ourselves to recognize the humanity of somebody like Ralph Burton. At the same time, however, he includes a number of songs. So of course, this is, kind of natural, since Harry Belafonte was a singer, that we would include songs in this movie sung by him. At the same time, the way he performs these for Sarah Burton and for us seem to lean toward the fact that he's going to be a happy entertainer no matter what his world looks like. And of course, that idea has been used in quite racist ways in the cinema in the past as well, and in entertainment and American culture and culture in general. And we see it here in this scene where he's singing a song while dancing around his apartment. We have a toy train, as if he's taken the time to introduce these joyful, childlike elements to his life. And he's singing. Here, it's very clear that he's singing to the audience, giving us a moment of reprieve from this otherwise rather dark picture.
Most a year, waiting for the sun to shine, waiting for the sun to shine, hoping you change your mind.
But because of the history of Black entertainers in American culture singing for white people, this moment has a kind of resonance that I'm not sure McDougall would have really wanted to have if he had given it a little bit more thought. The other pairing that I want to talk about is a moment in the movie where Ralph Burton is collecting the artifacts of culture because no one is left to do it for him. So he's taking books and paintings and sculptures and other things from New York City and amassing them in his apartment to create a history of human life. One of the paintings that he takes is this picture by Winslow Homer, The Gulf Stream. And to this picture, Harry Belafonte makes a comment. He says, "Poor slob," indicating that he identifies with the character in the painting who's alone. But if we look at the painting in color for a moment, we can see a little bit more depth to the painting than is possible with the black and white footage. For one thing, nature is attacking the man in the painting who's fighting against an impending storm. At the same time, there are all these sharks around him, and you can see it in the color version of the painting. And I think if you think about these sharks, perhaps representing society or culture, there is no place that this man is safe, neither in nature or with the other creatures who are living around him in the ocean who are coming to attack him. So I think the painting is a bigger comment on society than just the fact that it is a portrait of a black person on the sea. We see something deeper to it. And we certainly see that when Ralph then breaks the mirror, destroying himself rather than to destroy the culture around him. And that sentiment is echoed in this conversation here.
Ralph, wouldn't it be easier if I moved into this building? I mean, instead of this going back and forth and you trying to make both places run. It took you all month getting electricity into my place. If I were here...
No,
Why not?
people might talk.
These two things together suggest that the museum that Ralph is building in his house carries with it the racist ideologies that existed in the culture prior to the moment of the end of the world. That is, even with the creators of these artworks and books gone, the embedded ideologies within them still contain a portrayal of inequality that has to be countered. And this is a conversation that we're having right now in culture as well. It didn't end in 1959. Right now, we're talking about the way that ideologies are embedded in statues or in books or in the cinema, particularly with the most recent discussion of Gone with the Wind and its racist ideologies, in spite of the fact that that film has been held up as a pinnacle of filmmaking for so long. It's important that we revisit these works and think about the ways in which we can't necessarily divorce the ideologies that exist within them from the ideologies of their creators. And that's one thing that this film is asking us to do.
I think in one of the most powerful scenes in this movie, they confront the issue of race, racial difference, racial perceptions head on in what can be described as a pseudo-sex scene. After having spent time together and getting to know each other, Sarah really wants to move from the abandoned building that she's living in into the same building that Ralph lives in. He resists the idea, saying, people will talk. I, of course, want to say, what people? Sarah is frustrated because she knows that they are the only people in the world and can't understand why he has a problem with her living in the same building. Her frustration boils over because there is an immense amount of sexual tension between the two of them. And as he attempts to calm her down, Ralph suggests that she find ways to keep herself busy the way that he does, turning on the lights, preserving art and history and literature. She fires back with the phrase,
I'm free, white, and 21, and I'm going to do what I please.
to this age-old insult, Ralph responds quietly, I guess I shouldn't give you advice. Why isn't he angry? Why doesn't he remind her that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't be free, white, and 21 anymore? She wouldn't have lights. She wouldn't have a place to live. But instead, he quietly allows her to rant. In an attempt to bring about peace again, she lightly requests that he cut her hair. And this scene then moves into a subtle pseudo-sex scene, where Ralph very clumsily and uncomfortably attempts to cut her hair in a stylish fashion, but ends up butchering it really, really badly and growing more and more frustrated as he continues to cut.
This hair-cutting scene as a substitution for a love scene is certainly not the only example in Hollywood for where one image has substituted for another. And this was because of the production code, otherwise known as the Hays Code, a set of don'ts and be carefuls and other rules for Hollywood filmmakers about what could and couldn't be shown in the cinema. The code was created in response to a number of scandals in the 1920s and the film content now that Hollywood could talk. There was a danger that people would be manipulated into thinking scandalous thoughts, seeing images of sexuality that they ought not to see or that might endanger America's youth. So the Catholic Legion of Decency produced a campaign that would alter Hollywood history and result in the production code. As you can see in these images, the production code kept itself largely to concerns about violence and sexuality, nudity, national feeling, and religion. And it also had a rule prohibiting interracial romance. So The World, the Flesh, and the Devil certainly wasn't going to have Harry Belafonte and Inger Stevens kiss, even though all three actors participating in the film thought that ought to happen. There's another substitution that happens at the end of the film, in which there's a duel between the two lead male characters that looks an awful lot like a Western. Of course, Western pictures often stage contemporary conflicts by putting them in the past. So this, too, is one way in which the film is able to comment on the present moment by making it seem to take place in another time or space. And yet, as Dr. Edwards just pointed out, there's something really uncomfortable because, of course, the film is supposed to be in the present.
This is the world we live in. We're alone in it. We have to go on from there.
And Ralph responds, we're living in a different world where I am not a barber. I can't do this. I can do anything else but this, but I cannot bring back the world that we had. That world where you would never have known me, where someone like me would have escaped your notice.
It strikes me, watching this film now in the middle of a pandemic, at a time of profound reckoning with America's history of racial injustice, that this shift that Dr. Edwards just talked about in the movie has also occurred in our contemporary life. The film's trailer asks us to imagine what we would do if we were one of these three people. Yet at some point in the movie, we move from trying to see ourselves in this scenario to really seeing the experience of Ralph Burton in the post-apocalypse. That is, the film pulls us from sympathizing with Sarah, who wants to bring back the world she knew, to recognizing that that world was built on a set of cruel laws and social practices that dehumanize Ralph. We've just witnessed a similar shift in America's perception of itself during the pandemic. I myself began the quarantine identifying with the title character in Chantal Akerman's film Jean Dillman, who spends many, many long minutes in a frame doing nothing more than peeling potatoes. In fact, I reenacted this scene in a moment of my own boredom. But now, like many Americans, my consciousness has moved to realizing that I need to do a whole lot more than potato peeling to address the past and change the future. And this brings us to the film's title, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. Why the religious overtones? When the world is gone, the flesh is prohibited, and the devil is nowhere to be found. Yet the film suggests all the world's evils remain embedded in the psyche of these characters, and they must be confronted and destroyed if they want to truly move on and begin again, and not remain stuck in the past, like Sarah in this scene.
Sarah can't handle this level of brutal honesty and starts to pull back. But by now, the cap is off of Ralph's volcano. He reminds her that it took the world coming to an end before she could see him for what he is, and to see that there's nothing wrong with what he is. I can't quite capture the pain and the rage in his face, or the actual shock in Sarah's face as she realizes that despite how well she feels that she knows him, she could never truly understand the experiences and the hell that he still carries in his head. I think as a Black professor on the Ursinus campus, I can bring a certain level of passion to this particular exploration because I understand Ralph's pain, because I live with it every day. We really can't explore a future the way that science fiction encourages us to do without acknowledging that we carry with us our pasts and that we lack any language that allows us to talk about these issues without visiting pain on one of our partners. I think this film brings that issue to the forefront and does it in a way that even 6 years later still kicks me in the gut. But given what our world is going through now, given all that we have experienced and are experiencing and will continue to experience, there is never a better time for this film.
Like this film, Harry Belafonte remains relevant. Now in his 90s, he continues to fight for justice. Harry Belafonte was born in 1927 in Harlem, but he spent much of his childhood in Jamaica, where his parents were from. And this experience there encouraged him to learn more about folk music, and particularly the music of laborers, which is what he's often known for. He started his career singing in nightclubs and then shifted to folk music when he studied these songs in the Library of Congress's Folk Music Archive, which he had access to. He says about his own career that he was an activist who then became an artist. And activism has been important to his career from the very beginning. He says, "I saw theater as a social and political force." And we can see this throughout the decisions that he made in his life. Harry Belafonte became a close confidant and friend of Martin Luther King Jr. He helped to organize the March on Washington in 1963. He marched in Selma. He fought against apartheid in South Africa. And today, too, he continues to fight. Upon learning about the death of George Floyd, he told his daughter that it's worse now than it was in the 60s. But he has great hope because he feels that people have seen the injustice and now are starting to change. As he describes his past, he says, "I was angry when I met Martin Luther King Jr. Anger helped protect me. Martin understood my anger and saw its value. But our cause showed me how to redirect it and make it productive." There's a new documentary about Harry Belafonte the week that he hosted The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson's program, in 1968. The documentary is directed by Yoruba Richin, and I would encourage you to see it if you have a chance. It's called The Sit-In. And in this documentary, she talks about the incredible possibility that happened that year when he hosted that show for an entire week. And this was possible because Harry Belafonte was in fact the first African-American television producer. So on the program, he was able to invite Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, Lena Horne, Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, all these people who had been very political artists and activists like himself. It was a moment of great possibility, as he would say, is also true of this time. So why does it matter who Harry Belafonte was in any kind of discussion of the world, the flesh, and the devil? It matters because sometimes our politics bleed into the characters that we play. It matters because what he stands for and what he stood for in 1959 influenced how audiences saw and heard him then and how we see and hear him now. And it matters because his political commitments are more important to him than the characters that he played. Who Harry Belafonte is one big reason why The World, the Flesh, and the Devil matters today.
Situated in the past, it actually points to a future that we are living in right now. Where do we go from here? Thank you.